This isn't just another stop on tour. It's a signature event built on the promise of guaranteed elite fields, where the PGA Tour essentially tried to engineer certainty in a sport that has always thrived on unpredictability. But instead of momentum carrying over from the Masters tournament, what's actually unfolding is a quieter kind of disruption, where the absence of star power starts to reshape the entire atmosphere before a single shot is struck. Because when the field drops and the names you expect to see aren't there, the narrative doesn't begin with birdies or leaderboards. It begins with who is missing, and that shift changes everything, especially when players like Rory McIlroy step away after a peak emotional week, and veterans like Justin Rose also withdraw, alongside a broader group of top-tier names who normally anchor attention, viewership, and competitive weight. Suddenly, the tournament is still being played at the highest level, but the perception of what highest level means starts to fracture, because the PGA Tour didn't just design these events for competition. It designed them for certainty, for stacked leaderboards, for the assurance that every week feels like a championship field, and when that assurance breaks, even partially, the silence around those absences becomes louder than any broadcast moment. It forces a more uncomfortable question onto the sport, whether the structure is still reliably producing its intended product, or whether the modern rhythm of golf, compressed schedules, emotional fatigue, and competing priorities means that even the strongest fields are starting to feel conditional rather than guaranteed, and that uncertainty is where the real tension begins to build. The RBC Heritage is a signature event, a format created by the PGA Tour to guarantee elite competition designed so that when fans tune in, they are supposed to see the best players in the world going head-to-head under amplified stakes, with bigger prize funds, smaller fields, and increased prestige, all reinforcing the idea that every shot should matter more than it does in a normal week. But that promise only works if the stars actually show up to fulfill it. And right now that expectation feels incomplete, because even a single absence is noticeable in a field like this. And 6 changes everything. Players like Rory McIlroy, still carrying the emotional weight of the Masters tournament, choose to step away entirely rather than extend the grind immediately afterward, creating a pause that disrupts the rhythm fans assume will naturally continue, while veterans like Justin Rose, who came painfully close to a defining moment at Augusta only to fall short, also withdraw without injury or external pressure, simply stepping back into silence. And when those names, players who normally anchor attention, storylines, and competitive gravity, are absent at the same time, the conversation around the tournament shifts from who is playing well to who is not playing at all, exposing a tension at the heart of modern scheduling, that even carefully constructed elite fields still depend entirely on participation, and when that participation becomes inconsistent, the illusion of guaranteed greatness starts to crack in subtle but unmistakable ways. Point 2 names, 2 storylines, and already the field at the RBC Heritage feels lighter than it should. But as more absences stack up, the pattern becomes harder to ignore, because when players like Hideki Matsuyama, a Masters champion with global pull and a consistent presence on the biggest stages, and Adam Scott, one of the most respected and technically complete veterans of his generation, are also missing, the tournament is no longer just dealing with routine withdrawals, it's dealing with a thinning of its core identity. These are not players who fill out space on a leaderboard. These are players who give structure to the broadcast itself, who turn early tee times into must-watch golf, and who provide the kind of competitive gravity that justifies calling an event elite under the modern system created by the PGA Tour. And when you widen the lens further, when you account for additional quiet absences that don't always make headlines individually, but collectively reshape the field, you begin to understand why the number starts creeping from 3 to 5 to 6 or more, depending on how strictly you define star power. And that's where perception changes, because the issue is no longer about scheduling or coincidence. It becomes about expectation versus reality. This was supposed to be the PGA Tour's answer to fragmentation, a controlled environment where the best players were concentrated by design, where signature events guaranteed that fans would never have to question who was playing. Yet what's unfolding instead is a more uncomfortable dynamic, where even within a system built for certainty, availability itself has become unpredictable. So the problem isn't just who is missing, it's what those absences do to the meaning of the event, because when enough top-tier names step away, even temporarily, the label elite field starts to feel conditional rather than guaranteed. and that shift quietly undermines the entire promise these events were built on, leaving behind a tournament that is still highly competitive, still professionally strong, but no longer immune to the one thing it was designed to eliminate: doubt about whether the best are actually there. You create exclusivity to guarantee quality. You shrink the field so every name matters. But the problem begins when the very players the system is built around start choosing not to show up. Because the structure doesn't collapse in a single moment. It cracks slowly at first, almost invisibly, and then all at once when enough pressure builds in the wrong places. And that's what makes this so significant, because these aren't just golfers filling competitive slots on a leaderboard. They are global draws like Rory McIlroy and others at that level, players who move television ratings, define storylines, and determine whether casual fans even care about tuning in, which means when they're absent, the impact isn't just competitive, it's cultural. It changes how the entire event feels before a shot is even hit. And that's why the situation at the RBC Heritage doesn't read like isolated withdrawals anymore, but like a developing pattern, because at first glance it looks routine. Players coming off a demanding week at the Masters tournament stepping away, managing schedules, protecting energy. But that explanation starts to strain when it repeats across multiple top-tier names, and what should feel like continuity instead feels like fragmentation. Augusta itself matters in this equation because it is not just another stop. It is an emotional and physical peak, a 4-day pressure environment that demands total focus and leaves players carrying a kind of fatigue that doesn't reset immediately when the final putt drops, which means the very event designed to be the crown jewel of golf also becomes the reason the following week feels structurally different. So when the RBC Heritage is supposed to ride that momentum and instead feels like it is missing gravitational weight, the conversation naturally shifts away from results and toward absence. And once that shift happens, the entire idea of guaranteed elite fields begins to feel less like a certainty and more like a condition that only holds when every star decides to participate at the same time. The kind you don't recover from in a few days. That's where the real story of modern professional golf starts to shift, because what looks like simple withdrawals on a schedule are often something far more layered beneath the surface. When players walk away from the Masters tournament, they aren't just leaving behind a scorecard. They're carrying a full emotional and physiological load, pressure built over 4 days, disappointment from missed chances, adrenaline crashes that hit once the final putt drops. And for players like Rory McIlroy or Justin Rose, that swing between expectation and outcome can be significant enough that stepping away the following week isn't about strategy. It's about recovery at a deeper level that doesn't reset overnight. And yet the calendar doesn't bend for that reality, because the structure of the PGA Tour is built on continuity, not pause. High-stakes events stacked closely together, momentum assumed rather than earned, and signature tournaments designed to guarantee elite fields with bigger purses and tighter competition. But in doing so, the system also increases the demand for constant availability from players who are already operating at the edge of physical and mental capacity. So what was intended as opportunity starts to feel, for some, more like repetition without recovery, where every week requires peak performance immediately after another peak. And that's where the tension builds quietly in the background, not in the scoreboard itself, but in the expectation that the best players can continuously absorb emotional highs and lows without stepping back, even when the human cost of those swings is exactly what determines whether they show up at all. A grind even the best players in the world are starting to push back against. And here's where the situation becomes more complicated than simple withdrawals or scheduling conflicts, because while some top players choose not to appear at events like the RBC Heritage, others aren't even in a position to participate due to eligibility rules, structural limitations, or tour status constraints, which creates a split reality inside the same ecosystem. One group stepping away by choice, another effectively locked out by design. That's when the narrative stops being about individual decisions and starts becoming about system behavior, because the signature event model under the PGA Tour was created specifically to solve fragmentation. Its purpose was to concentrate elite talent into guaranteed fields, ensuring that fans would consistently see the strongest possible competition on the biggest stages. But that only works if participation is stable. And right now, stability is exactly what's breaking down. Instead of guaranteed star power, what emerges is inconsistency. Some players resting after emotionally and physically draining weeks at events like the Masters Tournament, others navigating schedules, obligations, or eligibility boundaries that prevent entry altogether. And together those forces reshape what elite field actually means in practice. So the contradiction becomes unavoidable. The system was designed to eliminate uncertainty, yet it is now producing it. Not because the quality of golf has dropped, but because availability has become unpredictable. And in that gap between design and reality, the original promise of signature events begins to feel less like a fixed guarantee and more like a condition that only holds when every layer of the structure aligns at the same time, which increasingly it does not. Others aren't eligible, and that distinction matters because it means the field isn't just thinning by choice. It's being reshaped by structure, timing, and access rules that determine who can and cannot even enter. So the result is a shrinking lineup that doesn't feel like intentional exclusivity anymore, but something closer to absence. And when fans start scanning a leaderboard and noticing who is missing before they even register who is playing, the entire emotional framing of the tournament changes in real time. This isn't just about one weekend field at the RBC Heritage. It's about a deeper instability creeping into the system built by the PGA Tour, because signature events were designed to remove doubt, to guarantee that when the spotlight turns on, the best players are there, fully assembled, creating a consistent product of elite competition. But when participation becomes inconsistent, that guarantee starts to dissolve. And that's where the uncomfortable question emerges, not from outside criticism, but from within the logic of the system itself. If your biggest names don't show up, or aren't able to show up, then what exactly is being sold to audiences who were promised certainty? That tension sits underneath everything, because the concept of signature depends entirely on reliability, and reliability depends entirely on presence. And right now those two ideas are no longer perfectly aligned. Still, the tournament begins as it always does. The fairways at Harbour Town Golf Links remain perfectly maintained. The coastal wind still moves the flags with the same rhythm, and the structure of professional golf continues forward as it always has, even as the meaning behind who is actually in the field quietly shifts in the background. The first tee shots are still struck with the same precision and intention that defines this game at the highest level, because golf doesn't pause for context, narrative, or absence. It simply continues, as it always has, across venues like the RBC Heritage, where competition remains real even when the composition of the field feels different than expected. The tournament moves forward under the structure of the PGA Tour with players ready to compete, names ready to rise, and opportunities waiting for those willing to take them. And for some competitors, this shift doesn't represent a weakened stage at all, but an opening, because when established stars step away or are absent for any reason, the space they leave behind doesn't stay empty for long. Instead, it becomes a platform where players who might normally sit just outside the spotlight suddenly find themselves elevated into it, where a strong weekend can change perception, rankings, and even career trajectory in a way that would be far harder in a fully stacked field. That's the enduring appeal of golf at its core. It constantly redistributes opportunity based on performance and timing, allowing new stories to emerge whenever the structure shifts, even slightly. But at the same time, that opportunity cannot fully replace what is missing when the biggest names are not present, because presence carries a gravitational weight that reshapes how an event is perceived before a shot is even played. And without it, even the most meaningful performances can feel like they exist in a slightly different atmosphere, still competitive, still legitimate, but no longer anchored by the same collective intensity that defines the sport's most complete fields.